their veins. Mackie and Judd on SKOR North and SKORNorth.com.
And actually, it is bonus scoop time, which means that we are going to get all of the details and the juicy stuff and much more from our guy, Doogie, from, of course, Channel 5 Eyewitness News and SKOR North Scoop fame. Check out his Scoop podcast. Declan Goff, executive producer. I am Judd Zolgad. And Doogie, let's start with the Vikings. As far as things go, I want to start with one player who right now has as many penalties as targeted passes. Chirs Herndon, who cost this franchise, Dukes, a fourth-round pick. And we are led to believe by the GM of the Vikings, Rick Spielman, that draft picks are collateral that cannot be just simply replaced. So fourth-round picks are incredibly valuable. After Irv Smith Jr. got hurt, Spielman starts to shop around for a tight end and lands on Chirs Herndon of the Jets, sends them a fourth-round pick. He also gets a sixth back. And after Herndon took two very key penalties on Sunday against Detroit, he now has as many penalties as targets, I believe, on the season. And my question is this. We'll start you off with this one. Is this the best that Rick Spielman could do?
Well, he certainly aimed higher, Judd. Jeremy Fowler, somebody we both know well, former Vikings beat reporter, and now he works for ESPN. He hopped in this morning with news that the Vikings did reach out to Philadelphia soon after the Irv Smith Jr. injury, not about Zach Ertz, but about Dallas Goedert, where I can tell you that it makes a ton of sense. Pre-draft, I mean, really not that long ago, pre-draft, the Vikings did all sorts of work on Goddard. My intel, Judd, is they were pre-draft huge fans of Dallas Goedert. You look at his production so far in Philadelphia. I think the player they thought he'd be, he has turned out to be that player and probably more. Philadelphia, for whatever reason, multiple reasons, decided to not engage the Vikings in that back and forth. Undoubtedly, Chirs Herndon has been a disaster. He really has. I would call Arizona. I would beg Arizona after Max Williams goes down. Just gruesome season-ending knee injury. I feel horrible for the Waconia native. Thankfully, he got paid. He got a nice contract from Arizona last year. But I still feel horrible. I mean, he looked so good against the Vikings. He looked good in the win in Los Angeles a couple weeks ago against the Rams. I feel horrible. Former second-round pick. Like, Max Williams has so much untapped potential. We were starting to see that. It took a few years. We were starting to see it. And now he suffers this gruesome injury. If I'm Rick Spielman, I'm being aggressive. I am reaching out to Arizona saying, okay, does Chirs Herndon interest you at all? I get it. I'm not recouping a fourth, but more than likely, you're going to continue to be really good. You'll be picking late in the fifth round. Give us a fifth round pick or come up with some sort of happy medium. Maybe Arizona feels like, hey, the change of scenery to Minnesota for, different reasons, just it hasn't worked out, but there's enough talent there. We will unearth that talent. So if I'm the Vikings, I'm just telling you my opinion. There's no sourcing behind this, but I would reach out to Arizona with the trade deadline approaching on November 2nd.
Yeah, I would say seventh round pick. He's done nothing.
Fine. Get something.
I would just take a draft. I would take any
free up the roster spot. Yeah,
exactly right. It's been that move has been a mess, and that's the weird thing about that trade. The trade for the kicker, the kid from Baltimore, for a fifth round pick a few years ago. Because Rick always talks about these draft picks, like, you can't just give these picks up, and I love these picks and blah blah blah, and then you just sort of make these trades, and they're like, this guy stinks. What do your spies tell you, dudes? Because it came extremely close to happening. If the Vikings had lost on Sunday and they were 37 seconds away from a loss to the woeful Detroit Lions, what do your spies tell you about what might have transpired with the head coach before the bye, or I should say during the bye, which the Vikings will now play Carolina on Sunday, have an off week, and then begin a very difficult stretch of games coming out of that?
I feel pretty confident that the Wilfs at least would have kicked around the idea of making Andre Patterson the interim head coach. Not that they lost to Detroit, it would have been more about how they lost, right? And
Yeah.
so, I mean, just the juiciness, right? The irony of a kicker storyline. But I can't sit here definitively 100%, Judd, and tell you that if the Vikings had lost on Sunday, if Greg Joseph doesn't make the 54-yard field goal, that they end up losing that game, that today, Tuesday morning, the 12th of October, that we would for sure be talking about Andre Patterson as the interim head coach. It's possible that Mike Zimmer still would have survived for at least a little bit longer. Maybe you ride it through this week, make the change during the bye week. But like, I just don't know how you would have recovered from losing to the woeful Lions, who were down so many guys. Like, that's where it's interesting to me, Judd, that I think Zimmer is willing to die on this hill of we're a good team. Now, if it's one or the other, if it's good or bad, I'm not sure they're a bad team, but it's hard to look at them and say, yeah, that's a good team. Like, Detroit's offensive line got pretty good push down Frank Ragnow, the Twin Cities native, Chanhassen High School, who the Vikings, by the way, loved pre-draft.
He's a good player when
loved
he's healthy.
Dallas Goedert. They loved Frank Ragnow. I was at Frank Ragnow's house the night of the draft. Trust me, with some people in Ragnow's camp there was a ton at his house that night. There was a ton of Vikings buzz, but Detroit, jumped the gun a little bit, at least in the Vikings' minds, taking him like a pick 20. That was the draft where the Vikings ultimately landed Mike Hughes in the first round. But trust me, if Frank Ragnow was on the board, the Vikings were going to take him. So Frank Ragnow out Sunday, Taylor Decker out Sunday, Penei Sewell playing hurt. Yet that Lions offensive line created run opportunities for Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift. You think about Sunday, Christian McCaffrey, signs point to him probably playing, maybe not at 100%, then coming out of that, playing Ezekiel Elliott after the bye. Like, there's no proof that this Vikings run defense can stop even adequate run offenses, let alone really good elite run offenses. They may find a path to 7 or 8 victories. In fact, I think they for sure go over 7. So I think they can get to 8. Heck, maybe even if a few things go right, they get to 9. But I'm telling you, Judd, and I've made this point a bunch, but let me reiterate it because I get that the audience is ever changing. The internal expectations going back to the summer, way higher than most of us. And I had the Vikings pinned at 10 victories preseason. Now, if I could go back, I don't think they'd get to 10. But I thought this roster was good enough to win 10 games, even with a really challenging schedule. My sense is internally, not universal, but enough people, including those way, way up, really felt like they had assembled a roster that could make a deep run in January that they felt like was the best in the NFC North. Now, some of that might have been, the drama in Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers not quite knowing how that would unfold, but they felt like they had the best roster in the division. And they still get the Packers twice. I get it. They could make a run at the division title, but at this point, even with all those injuries, those key injuries in Green Bay, I think you would say that the Packers are the overwhelming favorite to win the division.
I don't know what exactly this is extremely hard to quantify. And I don't know, like, I can't just say this with certainty, but it started in training camp. And at that point in time, it was fairly easy to point your finger at and say, this is the problem. But it still feels like with this team, Doogie, something is off. It still feels like something's not quite right. And I don't know if that's Mike being he seems more cantankerous, not necessarily towards his players, but just in general. There's something that doesn't feel right. And I'm going to give you one thing that I think, and like, this is a very like behind the scenes thing. And I'm sure that there's a portion of the people who are listening or watching this who are going to be like, oh, come on, Judd, you are making things up.
Well, let me stop you there though, Judd. Let me remind people, this is not me, separating my shoulder, patting you on the back. It's, if that's even possible. I think people need to remember that you've covered the Vikings for multiple decades. You were in the belly of the beast on a daily basis as the beat reporter for the Minneapolis Star-Tribune for multiple years.
Mhm.
You have unbelievable contacts. I know you bring me into this segment for scoops. Truthfully, you probably end up with more NFL scoops, specifically Viking scoops, than I do. The audience should know that oftentimes you'll text me on something, then maybe I run with it after I check on it. Maybe you don't have the time to check on it.
You're a
I
scoops guy.
do. We get to the bottom of it together collectively, but
Sure.
oftentimes you don't even want the credit. But I want to remind the audience that, trust me, when you say something like that, my tentacles, go up.
I appreciate that, Doogie.
My figurative tentacles go up because you have your finger on the pulse of that franchise more than a lot of people. You look at the people that now are the, quote unquote beat reporters. A lot of them haven't been around the franchise for very long. You have been. So I take your word oftentimes as gospel.
Well, thank you. And this comes more as an observation, though. It feels like part of the problem might be this. Mike doesn't have his guy in place. And by guy, Gary Kubiak was Mike's guy. Mike loves, he's an old salty football coach, and he loves to have a guy to sit down and have a cup of coffee with or a glass of wine with, and they talk football. And it's old school stuff. He does not want some punk who's 30 saying, Mike, can I be your guy? They had their what? The assistant offensive or the offensive line coach, Dennison, has had to be, I think, zooming in because he didn't get the COVID.
He's still involved. He's just not
right,
in
but
the
he's
building.
not in the building.
Yeah, he can't sit down and have that glass of wine with Zim.
Gary Kubiak retired, and now Clint is there, and I believe he's about 34. My point is, Mike seems like he's missing his guy, and I don't know if Patterson is that guy or not, but that's where he seems more disgruntled now, and that's not a good starting point, I don't think, for Mike.
Well, he does have Paul Gunther there. That is one of his guys, but I think there's something to be said about not having a guy on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I mean, undoubtedly, he misses. Yeah, him and Gary had a really strong bond.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is it exactly that? I don't know. You might need to sell me a little bit more on exactly that. I do think there's something to be said about you saying that something is off. I just don't know if it's quite that.
It might not be. Yeah, something feels off.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with something being off. I will say, I think they can win Sunday. Maybe it's recency bias after watching Philadelphia go down to Charlotte and win, and just thinking even if McCaffrey plays, he's not 100%. Don't know on Shaq Thompson. J.C. Horn for sure out. They make the trade for Gilmore, but he's still on injured reserve, so he can't come off. He won't be playing on Sunday. Their offensive line has been a mess. Moton moved from right tackle to left tackle. Cam Irving has been hurt. He didn't play last Sunday. I don't have an injury update on Cam Irving. If he goes back in at left tackle, Moton goes back to right tackle. But they have been a little bit of a mess. Even the win in Houston wasn't super, super impressive. But maybe for Carolina, it's still a leap forward. A win is a win. You don't need to apologize for that. But just watching that Thursday night game, they didn't blow me away. And then I DVR'd the Philadelphia game on Sunday, watched back some of it. They don't look all that impressive. That's a game the Vikings can win. So if you get to 3-3, maybe internally Zim can sell that in some sort of way, hype his team up for that Sunday night game on Halloween against the Cowboys. Although I think Dallas is a bad matchup for the Vikings.
Yeah.
I just do. I think just Elliott, and I think that speed on Dallas's defense. Trayvon Diggs, have you seen? Now, I get it. Pro Football Focus isn't the final word, but have you seen, if you look at the highest ranked cornerbacks, Trayvon Diggs is right at the top of the list. Jalen Johnson of Chicago is right at the top of the list. It came down. My understanding is it came down to Jalen Johnson and Jeff Gladney, and they went Gladney, which even at the time, this was a first guess. Jalen Johnson is 2.5 years younger than Gladney. If they were close in your mind, Why wouldn't you take the player? Now, there were some medical red flags with Johnson coming off of surgery, but if it was close, because they did consider Jalen Johnson, so it's not like he was off their board. If it was close, why would you take the guy that is 2.5 years older? And by the way, Trayvon Diggs, maybe it was the Diggs name after they had just traded his brother. Maybe it was something else, but Trayvon Diggs was never in the mix in the late 30s, when they ended up taking Gladney. I'm told, and Christian Fulton's even been good for the Tennessee Titans. He's another guy they did a lot of homework on, but he wasn't in the mix either. My understanding is it came down to Gladney and Johnson.
Interesting. Gopher football. What's up there?
Yeah, well, the first outlet, On3 Sports, they have a pretty good following on Twitter. They were the first to report this morning that Curtis Dunlap Jr., offensive lineman, IMG Academy guard, is now in the transfer portal. He was in the portal previously, got talked out of it, came back. He had played, but he was more like their sixth offensive lineman, not one of their main five. They had rotated some guys, but when you think about from left to right, Schluter, at guards, Andrews and Olsen, Schmitz at center, then Falele at right tackle. Those were the main five. But you think about the offensive line for next year, 2022. Now, they have some young guys that they're developing. But, my sense is Curtis Dunlap Jr. was going to be counted on heavily next year. Like, Falele should be a top 75 pick. If he's smart, he goes to the NFL draft. All right? Then you've got all these redshirt seniors, all those guys I just mentioned, Schluter, Andrews, Olsen, Schmitz. Those are all redshirt seniors. Like, it's time for them to move on. So when you think about the offensive line for next year, I don't think this is a significant blow this year, barring some sort of catastrophic injury. And we certainly have seen those with the team. So if one of those guards goes down, Andrews or Olsen, they'll miss Dunlap Jr., but they're going to miss him even more next year. But to me, once you have your foot halfway out the door like he did in the summer, then he's talked, into staying. Just oftentimes it turns sour. So I guess I'm not overly surprised. He also missed all of last year, so he was good in 2019. You think about that prolific Gophers offense in 2019. Curtis Dunlap Jr., starter on the offensive line, had something to do with that. But then he missed all of last year with an injury, enters the portal, is talked out of transferring, comes back. Now he's back in the portal. Who knows? Maybe they'll try to talk him out again. But I just think when a guy has his foot halfway out the door, it's usually a bad sign. And it's almost inevitable that it's going to go south. And in this case, now he's back in the portal.
Why leave right now?
That's weird. I agree. I mean, it's one thing to enter the portal after the season. Why enter now? I don't have a great answer for you there, Judd.
Okay.
To me, I mean, it almost looks like he's quitting on the team. I mean, I don't know how else to frame it, right? When you're leaving middle of the season.
Go play, right?
Correct. So to me, it looks like he's outright quitting.
It's interesting.
I mean, I'm sure he'll put something on social media at some point. Maybe he'll be able to explain it. I'd love to talk to him because I hate leveling that sort of accusation on anyone because that to me is a very heavy word. But from afar, admittedly, from afar, I've not texted with anybody yet this morning on this front. I will. Unfortunately, it'll be after I exit this conversation. I'll try to get to the bottom of it. But I'm just telling you, from afar, the appearance to me is he is quitting on his teammates.
Trey Potts back home and...
Yeah, well, it's great that he's back home, right? I mean, first and foremost,
right? Yeah,
he has his health. He's not going to die.
Right.
But it was a very dire situation for a while. I'm not ready to say that it's a career-ending injury. Let's see where he's at in about 2.5 to 3 months. Then we'll have a better understanding of if there is a football future, but certainly done for this season. But thankfully, he'll be okay. There's no signs of him, having to re-enter the hospital anytime soon, of him, potentially, God forbid, losing his life, anything like that. So the good news is he has his health.
So who is now the most likely candidate to step up with Mo out, Potts out, and so now you're basically to the third guy on the depth chart. Who is that going to be? I know there's options, but what's your best guess?
Well, they have the true freshman, Bucky Irving, Kai Thomas.
Don't call him Bucky. Don't call him Bucky. PJ
Yeah,
don't like
well, that's
that.
right. Bucko.
He's Buck.
He changed his nickname.
He's Bucko.
Yeah. You can't be
PJ
Bucky
changed his
here
nickname.
in Minnesota. You're right. He was Bucky, but he
I'm
changed
Hawkeye
it a few
Judd.
weeks
How's
ago.
it going?
Yeah. And don't forget about Bryce Williams, like the forgotten man.
They do.
Bryce Williams
What happened
ran
to him?
for over 100 yards a couple games at least, right? Like going back to 2018, Bryce Williams, it feels like, has been here forever, and he's been buried, but he's fully capable of helping the running game. So I would like to think, that it'll be a three-headed monster. Cam Wiley, he's only had about 2 or 3 carries so far through the 5 games. So it's hard for me to look at Cam Wiley and say the coaching staff has a lot of confidence in him. But, I think it's Irving. I think it's Thomas. And I'd like to think that Bryce Williams, being the senior member of that group, will also get an opportunity. But those would be the names I'd keep an eye on.
Nebraska, which for what? The last, is it 4 years now or so? 3 years has just been bad. Looks to be far more competitive now. How much of a test is this potentially going to be on Saturday at Huntington Bank Stadium?
Well, I mean, the Vegas odds makers, look at it as pretty much a toss-up. What's the latest spread? Nebraska -2, 2.5, 3. Now, if you factor in the 3 points for home field, maybe on a neutral field, they'd look at Nebraska as a 6.5 point favorite. But Nebraska is favored. I would take the Gophers. I just would. I mean,
their
PJ
quarterback's
Fleck,
not good, man.
Yeah, owns Frost. Yeah, I would. It's hard for me to bet against the Gophers against Nebraska at home. I mean, the Gophers went down to Lincoln last year, down a bunch of guys coming off, that COVID break. I mean, that's one of the more impressive wins in the PJ Fleck era. He would tell you that. Most fans would say, well, no, it's the Penn State game in 19. It's the Auburn Bowl victory. It's getting the axe back. And yeah, but Fleck would also remind you, because it's forgotten, that win last year in Lincoln, down all those guys, is right at the top of his most, memorable / impressive wins as Gophers coach. But they beat Nebraska here in 19. They beat Nebraska here in 17. I just saw that Nebraska's left tackle is all dinged up, or at least a guy that's been taking some snaps at left tackle. And yeah, I still think, that quarterback, like of the two, and it's not like, Tanner Morgan, I'm all in right now on him. I've let you know that I'm a big Zach Annexstad fan, that I just think he can wing the ball better. But the Gophers, feel like, hey, he might turn the ball over a little bit more than Tanner Morgan. But I'm a big Zach Annexstad fan, and he beat out Morgan a few years ago. Let's not forget about that. But of the two, Morgan and Martinez, I trust Morgan more. And with the game, as you mentioned, at Huntington Bank Stadium, I lean Gophers. It's not like I feel, super strong about that pick. But yeah, I mean, I told you a few weeks ago, I really liked the Gophers in West Lafayette. Turned out to be right. Trust me, I'm wrong plenty, but I'll remind you when I'm right. I do feel pretty good about the Gophers this Saturday.
The Wolves are unbeatable in exhibition games, Doogie. That's what I have surmised. You cannot beat this team. If you take them on anywhere, anytime in the preseason, they're going to kick your ass.
Well, if the goal is to get to 110-0, you need to win your first 3, right? So if you're going to go unbeaten in the preseason, go 82-0, and then run all the way through the postseason, I think it's 110 games. You got to start somewhere. Yeah, I mean, the Clippers were down how many starters last night? Paul George didn't play. Reggie Jackson didn't play. Yeah. Serge Ibaka didn't play. Morris Sr. didn't play. But yeah, I mean, they rebounded the ball well. I mean, that was one thing I was going to keep an eye on last night. They rebounded well. And to the Wolves' credit, I mean, Josh Okogie, minor injury. Jordan McLaughlin, minor injury. They are pretty darn healthy. And I still contend, if they can maintain health, Phoenix, and yeah, Chris Paul put them over the top, but Phoenix, a big part of Phoenix making the run they did last year was they were as healthy as any team in the league. If the Wolves can find a way to get Edwards on the court for over 75 games, Cat over 75, Russell over 75. I think they are one of those top 10 teams. I think they are a play-in team minimum.
Final scoops.
Where would you like to go, Judd? I mean,
hey,
it's NHL opening night. Yeah, it's NHL opening night. Yeah, so I mean, there's
Santa Claus, pour it out.
Yeah, there's no Jack Eichel buzz. Like, what money would the Wild send to Buffalo?
They're not going to get Jack Eichel.
I think that pipe dream is dead, at least for the time being. Maybe it gets revisited way down the road.
I think he's going west now.
Yeah.
Calgary,
well, maybe Los Angeles.
The Ducks,
Los Angeles.
The King.
Yeah.
I don't know about the Kings because they certainly tied up some salary cap space, but I could see the Ducks. I could see the Flames. But I think the Wild was very involved as far as being intrigued by it and moved on a while ago.
Yeah,
like I don't think they've gone back to Buffalo and been like, oh yeah, let's get back in.
I think that's accurate. The Tampa Bay Rays are done. So there's been Twins fans asking me, what about the Twins welcoming back Nelson Cruz? I would not bet on that. Well, that's the short answer. They need to create DH at bats for others.
Correct.
There's no reason to bring back Nelly Cruz. He's not coming back at $4 million or $5 million. So we need to invest minimum of 8, 9, 10 million.
We need to move on, Dukes.
And my sense is the Twins are in that boat, that it's been one heck of a run. They've thoroughly enjoyed having Nelly here, but that there is not interest in bringing back Nelson Cruz this winter. Let me add also, as we're now the home of the University of St. Thomas athletics, Courtney Brown Jr., good basketball player. He's still working through some paperwork issues. He can practice with the team, but he's not quite eligible yet. So you think about it's less than a month. It's November 9th. St. Thomas opens up at Chicago State, their first Division I men's hoops game, less than a month away. There's still some work to be done to get Courtney Brown Jr. on the court. His younger brother, Kendall Brown, is a first-round NBA pick. He's down at Baylor. He played at Eastridge High School for a little bit before going to Sunrise Christian Academy in Kansas. Courtney Brown Jr. is from Eastridge. He just transferred into St. Thomas. He played his first couple years in college at UW Milwaukee. It was like their 7th or 8th man last year. So he played Division I last year. I mean, that's the hurdle for Tower. I was over at a Tommy's practice last week. At least for this year, after Jarvis Omersa, the former Gopher, opted out because you need to be vaccinated, right? If you're a St. Thomas student, the COVID vaccine is mandatory. Jarvis Omersa didn't want the vaccine, I'm told, so he opted out of playing for the Tommies, but he had committed to playing for the Tommies. And at one point, they had Javon Hadley, former player from Matamidi and Cretin-Derham Hall. He went out east. I think it was UMass or some school out east, had a little bit of Division I experience, had initially committed to St. Thomas, then changed his mind. I believe he's now at a JUCO. So like 4 or 5 months ago, it looked like, maybe Johnny Tower would have some Division I experience for this year's roster, have a chance to win a few games. Now, they still might win a few games, but in terms of guys that have legit Division I playing time, it is like they have a kid from Siena that transferred, and he was like their 12th man. They have a kid from Northwestern that was like their 13th man. So maybe those kids got in garbage time. But literally, Johnny Tower really doesn't have a player this second that has like any Division I experience. So it would be very helpful if they can find a way to get Courtney Brown Jr. eligible.
Awesome stuff, man. Take care, and we will talk to you. I believe you're gone for a week or so, so we'll talk to you in a couple weeks after the Vikings bye, Dukes.
You got it. Thanks, Judd. Happy NHL opening night to you and Declan. Enjoy. Go Kraken.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Go Kraken.